just want to thank you for being here, right? Taking time out of your busy schedule to shed some light, also kind of talk about a little bit about your experiences and answer some of the questions that we had too as well. And especially for the unique perspective, right? Not only are you coming in as a medical professional, but as we see here too on the image as well, you're wearing the uniform as well. So you get to bridge both career paths, right? Military service along with being a medical professional too. So offering those unique experiences is something that is going to be extremely beneficial for those that are seeking a similar path or just want to kind of get a better insight into your current occupation along with military obligations as well. So thank you again for being here with us today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And so just a quick intro, we're just going to do some introductory questions along we'll get into the specific questions pertaining to your occupation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out loud the question just for our listeners that are listening auditory. And then if you don't mind just answering the question as well. But I will read out loud the question just for auditory purposes, and then we'll just go from there. So first one right off the bat, tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. So I am Captain Haley Davis. I graduated from Virginia, Maryland in the spring of 2020. So I have a doctorate of veterinary medicine, although I do go by Captain Davis in my daily job, not doctor. Prior to going to Virginia, Maryland, I did a bachelor's degree in both biology and health communication. And before that, I kind of grew up being a military brat. My dad was Marine Corps for 23 years. So growing up, I kind of
Wow.
had the great experience of traveling, getting to move around, see a lot of different cultures. And that definitely, as you can see, impacted my career decision. Outside of work, I enjoy some pretty sedentary hobbies. I love reading, I love crafting, and I do a bit of long distance running as well, just to keep fit.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And like I said, thank you for your family service as well to our country as well. Thank you. And so the next
Absolutely.
question is going to be, when did you first decide to become a veterinarian and along with why?
Great question. So I'm actually not one of those people who decided very early in my life to
Mm.
become a vet. It was actually a decision that I made in college. I actually thought I was more interested in either journalism or web design. Both of those, I've always been more of a creative person, and so I really enjoyed those. But once I started my undergraduate career, I happened to get a job because my parents, since I was living at home, they wanted me to get a job during my summers off, and I happened to find an open spot as a vet assistant in my local community. And when I saw the impact that communication can have, education can have, the strong relationships that humans have with their animals, and the impact that good veterinary care can provide to those people, that really set me on this trajectory of ultimately becoming a veterinarian. I've always loved science. I've always been kind of good at it along with the creative stuff. And so it was kind of an easy decision to make once I saw that level of impact. So I would say sophomore year of undergraduate school is when I got pretty serious about becoming a veterinarian.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And I guess it goes to show for the audience too that when you're attending college, you don't have to have it figured out 100%, right? And I think you kind of get that additional
Absolutely.
exposure and experiences for those reasons. Thank you for that. And
Absolutely.
moving on to our next question. How and why did you choose the veterinary school you attended?
Great question. So I attended, like I said, Virginia, Maryland, which was at the time my in-state school. I did apply to two other veterinary schools, the University of Georgia and the University of Pennsylvania. Uh, I got accepted at Penn and at Virginia, Maryland. And ultimately, I got some really good advice from a mentor of mine who wrote one of my letters of rec, essentially saying that, we all get the same degree, we all pass the same exam, the NAVLE, at the end of the road. And so I needed to think very carefully before I justified paying almost twice the amount of tuition, right, for out of state, um, for the benefits of going to one school over the other. And ultimately, I'm glad she gave me the advice. I have become a believer in that same advice of y- realistically a DVM or a VMD is the degree you get regardless of what school you go to, and so you really need to be thinking carefully about how those finances will impact your future career decisions and opportunities based on where you go and how much money you end up spending going to school, because it's certainly not getting any cheaper. So does that answer your
Absolutely. Yeah.
question?
Yes, no, it definitely does. And thank you so much for sharing. And then moving on to the next question, what surprised you most about veterinary school? That's a good one.
Ooh, that is a good one. um So I think there's immediately kind of two things that stand out to me personally. The first is just the level of camaraderie that I felt going into veterinary school and throughout my vet school. I think some people were kind of telling me about, how their experience was.
Mm,
People were very competitive. People were, if they're trying to go into an internship, they can be very unwilling to be a team player and they really want to progress their own personal career. That was not my experience at all. I could tell very much from day one that my entire class just wanted to be one big team and come
mm,
together. And so that was really kind of a surprise to me because prior to vet school, I had very much been like a solo studier. I'd kind of done best just kind of going my own way and doing my own thing. And in vet school, it's very much a team sport because you have areas where you will understand and you will, get the material much more so than your classmate to the left. And then they're going to bounce back and have a firmer grasp on material that you don't understand. And so coming together as a team, I think that was probably what surprised me most was how I transitioned very quickly into a team studier. The other thing that really surprised me about veterinary school, which I should not have been surprised about, is just the sheer volume of material. I had always been, yeah, right. I'd always been a relatively like good studier. I mean, I did fine in undergrad, and I truly was like, it can't be that bad. It's probably just some stuff about vaccines, anatomy, phys. No, whenever you think you have a firm grasp on something, you uncover the new layer of the onion of another depth of knowledge that you should be attaining and trying to take in. And so, truly drinking from the fire hose should not have been the big surprise, but it ended up being a big surprise for me as well.
Well, that's good to know, right? For all the pre-meds knowing that, hey, when it comes to that advice, like it's actually the reality of it too, right? So take notice. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And then
Yeah.
moving on to the next question, what was the biggest challenge you faced in vet school? You might have answered that partly, but if you wanted to expand on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest or one of the biggest challenges, maybe being a little bit more specific to my experience, I actually had very limited to no large animal experience. So, thought or cows, horses, sheep, goats. I had had the opportunity to work in a necropsy lab with them. So after they had passed away,
Hmm.
I had had that experience. But working with them, like just trying to run them through shoots, understanding the differences in care because these are not pets, they are a livelihood. And so understanding how some of the left and right limits of medicine change when we're talking about not only an individual animal, but then another bigger picture herd based approach, that was a very new world to me. And I had to rely very heavily on my classmates who had worked on a farm before or had that experience because even like palpating a cow or trimming a hoof, things that you go out to a farm and clients kind of expect you to be able to do, regardless of whether or not you've gone to vet school. Those were things I had to pick up in addition to the medical knowledge, just to kind of show that I had that kind of street cred, so to speak, with those animals. And so I think one of the things, had I been able to go back and do it again, I definitely would have tried to pick up at least some large animal experience before getting into vet school.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that adds to your input that you said about that shared collaboration and working as a team. You had mentioned that you leaned on your fellow classmates to be able to work together too, and sharing that knowledge and expertise too. And I think that kind of blends into military service too, that unified team mindset as well. So thank you for sharing that. Moving on to the next question.
Absolutely.
Did you choose your specialty in any specific aspect of veterinary care?
Good question. So for the military, we do our careers a little bit differently. So I came onto active duty immediately after graduating. That's how the scholarship works. And so generally we work as a what we call a field veterinary officer, or kind of your vanilla DVM, for the first 4 to 6 years after graduating school. And then after that, then we have the opportunity to choose to go back and specialize. And
Hmm.
so in the military, really, you can choose from a variety of clinical specialties, lab animal, pathology. We have a very strong research presence in the Department of Defense. For me personally, what I have really been drawn to, kind of leaning more on my background of communication and education, is a specialty in preventive medicine and public health. And so there is a board certification you can get in preventive medicine. And I am looking to, I just took the boards this past spring. So wish me luck. Hopefully I passed. And
Yes.
then to complete that specialty, I'll go back and get either an MPH or a PhD in a public health related field to do something like crisis communication or disaster response. Those are kind of my passions right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. Like I said, I know you killed it, so it's no problem at all. And thank you for sharing the unique pathway too, especially given from the military aspect when it comes to the specific medical professional and being a vet within the armed forces too. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And our next question is, so what is unique about serving as a veterinarian in the Army as well?
Ooh, what isn't unique about serving as a veterinarian in the Army? Uh, one of the things that, so we have a corps chief who is kind of the head honcho of the veterinary corps, and one of the things he talks about is how military medicine needs to be treated almost as differently as small animal medicine or large animal medicine or corporate medicine. And so it well and truly is kind of its own category. One of the things about serving in the military as a veterinarian is not only am I responsible for canine lives, our working dogs, we do also have working horses, and we have some sea lions, some dolphins, and a few other miscellaneous exotics as well. We also are responsible for taking care of the humans on the installation. We have a huge role in both food protection and public health. Veterinarians are kind of the subject matter expert when it comes to zoonotic disease. I think the CDC just put out a statistic about how in the last 3 decades, about 75% of our newly discovered diseases are zoonotic in nature, meaning they come from animals and are transmitted to humans. And so, talk about the role that veterinarians can play in education
Correct.
of how those diseases work. Um, and how to prevent the spread of those. That's super important. And so in the military, we kind of are stationed at these installations as subject matter experts for the commander of that installation. So not only do we run a clinic and we see dogs, cats, the working dogs that come through, we see all of those, we also go and do food inspections of our grocery stores, of our little shopettes. of our meals ready to eat, right? The MREs, we go and inspect those to make sure that they are safe and wholesome for our soldiers, sailors, and airmen to consume. And so those mission sets, I think, are definitely one of the things that really sets military medicine apart because you are asking us to kind of take a step back from that clinical role that I think a lot of us are kind of developing during vet school is kind of they're developing us to be these clinicians, but we're also taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of one health and how animal health impacts human health, impacts environmental health, and how all three of those have to kind of come together to create the one health model. And so I would say that by and far away is what kind of makes the military a unique career path.
Wow. No, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. And moving on to the next question. If you had to do it all over again, would you still choose your current career path and why or why not?
Yes. So I would still choose to be a veterinarian in the military. I like any career path that you choose, any job you have, there are going to be bad days and good days. But what I have seen in the 5 years that I've been on active duty is that I have been able to make an impact far greater than what I thought I was going to be able to do. And so I would not change a thing other than perhaps, like I said, the small bits and pieces, getting more large animal experience, getting those small things. But overall, I have been very happy being a military veterinarian.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And moving on, has being a veterinarian met or exceeded your expectations?
Ooh, has being a veterinarian met my expectations? I'm sure I don't stand alone when I say that COVID threw us all for a loop that we were not
Yeah.
expecting. And I think that the world of medicine and science has kind of changed as a result of that, not just veterinary medicine. And so I think that we've had to kind of evolve with that. And so I do think that some of my expectations have kind of evolved as medicine has evolved and as public
Mhm.
perception and public needs of what they need from a veterinarian has evolved. And I think that's just the nature of the beast, right? We get into medicine to practice it, knowing that it's always going to change and we have to keep moving forward. That's why we're required to do continuing education. I would say by and large, uh, the experience I had as a vet assistant that exposed me to a lot of the private practice aspect of veterinary medicine definitely prepared me. Um, and then everything else, the military side, I've kind of learned along the way, and that's kind of the more unique side of the house. But as far as just veterinary expectations, I think my expectations have been met, yeah, for the most part.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing. And then moving on. So, what do you like most about being a veterinarian? And if you could share as well, what's one thing that you like the least about being a veterinarian as well?
Ooh. Okay, so what I like most about being a veterinarian is that like aha moment that you can get with clients
Mm,
sometimes after either like a specific type of communication or education where, they come into the appointment and they're so worried because Fluffy is doing this. And you're able to come in
okay.
as the subject matter expert, maybe run a few tests, or maybe just talk through it with them. And you can see this light bulb go off of, oh my gosh, this is why she's doing it. This is how we're going to make it better. This is how we're going to move forward. And that is what I really liked the most is seeing, I mean, yes, healing the pets, right? Taking care of the
Yes.
animals, but also the humans that come with it and making sure that that they also understand and are a part of that process. So client communication and client education, I think, are my two passions and what I really try to do well at.
Wonderful.
What I like least about being a veterinarian, one of the things I don't like is surgery. I really prefer to do the communication side, the preventive medicine side. That's kind of where my strong suit is. When it comes to the slicing and dicing and the stopping of the bleeding, and not really my cup of tea. I will stick with my sick calls and wellness visits, and I will leave the surgeries to the surgeons. So I would say that's what I like
Got it.
least.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing. And if you don't mind, just as well for your occupation as well, what does a typical day look like for you as well? Given the aspect of that military service too, kind of balances into the medical professional life too.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that no 2 days are the same. I'm sure you get that answer a lot. But truly, because we have so many different missions, it's really more like what does the typical week or month look like for me?
Mm.
I will say I just left an assignment where I was seeing clinics 3 days a week. So a typical day on one of my clinic days might be waking up at 5:30, going and doing some physical training or PT with my unit, and that can be anything from running to weightlifting. It's really the opportunity for us to come together as a team and practice our fitness and stay fit. And then after some showering and breakfast, I then am in the clinic from maybe 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then on my non-clinical days, uh, that can be anything from, like, honestly, I got to inspect a Coca-Cola facility where they had me sign an NDA saying I would not reveal the secret recipe. But that's one of our jobs, is if, they want to sell food on the installation, a veterinarian has to go in and make sure the food is safe and that they're preparing it the right way and that it's not going to make anyone sick. And so that was one of, like, a cooler part or a cooler day on the job. I also, if the installation wants to run a petting zoo, I have to make sure all the goats and the llamas and the sheep, all of them look safe, healthy. They got all the right documentation. And so it really just depends on what mission set I'm tackling for the day. And that's one of the things that I love, is that it never gets boring. And at the end of your assignment, which is usually like 2 to 3 years, you move to something completely different. So I just moved recently and now I'm an instructor at the schoolhouse. And so I'm going to be teaching those skill sets to our new veterinarians coming onto active duty.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Especially given the sheer volume of experiences and opportunities that you had since your time of active duty too, that kind of blends both military service and being a veterinarian too. So thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely.
And moving on to our next question. So how much of your work is research and or teaching? Do you also like the amount of each currently that you participate in? If not, why? I know you touched a little bit on the instructor position as well too. So this could add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about more of the typical position for our junior officers that are just coming in out of vet school. Uh, by and large, the research side of the house, yes, is a huge mission for the Department of
Mm.
Defense. But for us coming into the military, we typically do not play that big a role as um, they're called 64 alphas, which is my position, a field veterinarian. To participate in research, you would have to get a board certification in pathology, lab, animal medicine, or a PhD in a biomedical field, like toxicology or immunology, which are all tracks that the Army will pay for and let you do for free. And so that's not
Oh,
something that you pursue until that 3 to 6 years after being just a DVM in the military. But if that's something you want to do, that's something that the Army needs. And so we are always looking for new people who are interested in that line of work. When it comes to teaching, even as a 64 Alpha or a regular DVM in the military, we do a lot of teaching. And so I am responsible not only for teaching our 60 or 68 tangos, which are animal care specialists, They're kind of the
Mhm.
enlisted version of our vet assistant, vet techs. Their duties kind of merge the two positions together. We do a lot of teaching for them just to get them familiar with things that they may not have experienced in their train up through, they go through advanced individual training, which is about an 11-week period of time to train up. But we are heavily involved in training them. We are also heavily involved in training our military working dog handlers on the different aspects of like casualty care. So when they deploy downrange or overseas, typically a veterinarian's not going to be next to them, and typically an emergency hospital is not going to be an option. And so we really have to teach our handlers to be that first line of care for the military working dog to at least be able to evacuate them to that next level of care, which is usually going to be a veterinarian or at least a vet technician. And so teaching
Wow.
at my old job, I did at least 1 day a week, every week, if not twice a week. And then, as I said earlier, since I'm moving into an instructor position, that's now kind of my full-time job. So I expect that to expand a lot moving forward.
Got it. And would that be a two-year position
Yeah, so
for the
2 to 3
instructor?
years, 2 to 3 years for the full-time instructor.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Do you like the amount that you currently participate in as well?
I do. So teaching is one of my passions. I have always believed that you can have all the information in the world, but if you can't communicate it to others and educate others, you're really not going to get anywhere. And so I chose the instructor position. It was actually my first choice of assignment, and so
Awesome.
I'm super happy to be granted the position. And anytime I am able to, like, if anyone requests that I go out and teach them, like we have a lot of military physician's assistants or docs or nurses in the military that will request that canine, we call it canine TCCC, tactical casualty combat care. They request that training from us because again, we are just so few in comparison to them that it's
Mhm.
not atypical for them to see our working dogs instead of us just because they're closer. And so the more training we provide to them, the more likely it is that our working dogs will be able to return to the front line.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And then moving on to our next question. So on average, how many hours a week do you work and how many hours do you sleep per night as well? And how many weeks of vacation do you take as well?
Oh, what a good question. The answer is it definitely depends. Per week, the military is not a 9 to 5 job. It is definitely a job that has its ebbs and flows.
Yep.
There will be days where I do only work like a 30-hour week. There are weeks where I'm working 70 to 80 hours, and a lot of that really depends on what I'm doing at the time. Just like any civilian vet, when I do blood work, I have to make the callbacks. When I do surgeries, I got to call for the follow-ups. And so that kind of stuff definitely, like many other civilians, takes up a lot of after hours time, records management, right? And so those can definitely make the work weeks longer, but I would say on average, I probably work a 40 to 50-hour work week, and some of that is definitely self-inflicted. Um, when it comes to how many hours I sleep per night, I'm actually a stickler for getting at least 7. I try for 8, but I have noticed that I'm not as sharp if I get anything less than like 6. So I'm usually pretty good about going to bed early so I can wake up early. And then, how many weeks of vacation do I take? Not to brag, but the military probably has one of the best PTO policies.
Yes.
We don't go by hours, we go by days. So I accrue 2.5 days of leave a month, which, oh my gosh, public math is like what, 30 days a year? Uh, Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I get thirty days of paid leave a year, and on top of that, unlimited CE, you really just, it's up to the commander. But if the commander says, hey, yeah, we can lose you for 2 weeks for you to go do CE, that doesn't count against my 30 days. Unlimited sick call, I just have to get a sick call slip and then I'm on quarters, and that doesn't count against my vacation time. The As a government employee, I also get all of our federal holidays off. So that's like what, another 11 or 12 days out of the year. And then I'm not personally a mom or a dad, but our paternal and maternity leave policy is 12 weeks of 100% pay, which I don't think any civilian veterinarian company can say. So generally, I try to take up to those 30 days every year, and that's something my command has always encouraged me to do. Uh, and so I really do not feel any guilt over taking those days because Lord knows we work hard enough to earn them. So that's it.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's definitely, especially even on the federal civilian side too. I will say active duty military definitely get some additional benefits on taking those leave and entitlements too, which it comes with the terrain, right? Because you don't get paid overtime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that leads into your next question.
Yes. So the next question is, are you satisfied with your income? And this one, we don't have to talk about specifics. We could just talk about general um, qualitative, yes, satisfied or not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually no secret. You can Google what a O3 with 5 years time in service makes, and it's publicly available on any website. It is definitely less than what a civilian makes, especially if they are on the pro sal model. I am straight salary. I do not make production. I am not hourly. And so I always know it's going to be on my paycheck. There's no variation, which I like. I also, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I'm not a fan of the production model for veterinary medicine. I think we won't get into it, but I prefer to be salary. So even when I have moonlighted in the past, where I work at civilians on the weekends just to keep up some of my clinical skills, I've always asked on those positions to be either salary or hourly as well. Am I satisfied with the income? Absolutely. I mean, in this day and age, I think anything over six figures, which I do make over six figures, is things that most of the people in this country would dream of. So I think certainly I'm not making the production checks that a lot of my coworkers are, but I'm not making uh, a lot less than they are, if that makes sense. Um, I think the gap they measure is about 30K average. So on average, military vets make about 30,000 less per year than our civilian counterparts do.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing that too. Thank you. And moving on to our next question. So if you took out any educational loans, is or was paying them back a strain for you? And if you can offer, what advice would you give to students who want to pursue a similar career, but face debt due to these educational loans as well?
Well, great advice is pursuing a similar career is probably the best thing you can do for your loans. So I'm completely debt free. I've been debt free since I was about 2 years out of vet school. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, there is a scholarship program, and that is how most of the veterinarians enter the military. We take in about 40 veterinarians a year, of which about 30 of them are through the scholarship. So we offer 3 year scholarships. So you apply during your first year of vet school, or I am tracking there are some vet schools now that are only 3 years. And so we're still trying to figure out how to make sure they are able to apply for the scholarship, but they absolutely are able to apply for the scholarship and have their full 3 years paid for. And so the only loans I had, I was very fortunate to have parents who paid for my undergraduate, but I did have loans from my first year of vet school, which while you're on the scholarship in school, they also give you a monthly paycheck to live off of, which at the time for me was about $2,000 a month. And I think that's gone up to about 2,700. It usually goes up with inflation every year. With that, I was able to kind of get through the rest of that school without taking on any additional loans. And I was also able to pay down my existing loans while I was in school. And so at the end of my first year, excuse me, at the end of my first year, I graduated with about 40,000, and then the Army offers additional loan repayment if you sign on the dotted line for another what we call active duty service obligation, where you sign on the dotted line saying, hey, I'll stay on for this number of years in exchange for this paycheck. And so for me, they paid out all but $10,000. And so that was a few vaccine clinics later, and that was paid off. And so I did take out loans. Paying them back was not a strain for me. Thank goodness. I'm very fortunate. And what advice do I have? Um, Join the military. Number one, we're great. No, if you like the idea of, and I always tell this to people who are interested in the scholarship, if what you want to do is just general practice medicine, the military is not for you. But if you want to do literally anything else, it's a great career path, a great stepping stone, and it makes you very, very financially secure. And so, my recommendation, if that's not able to be pursued, go to your in-state school. The push to go to out of state for like some learning style or some other benefit, I really just don't, in my personal opinion, see a huge benefit of in exchange for an additional, what, 6 figures of debt usually in some cases. So that's usually what I recommend to people is go to your in-state school.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. If you don't mind adding to that too, because I know for the audience here that will be looking at this video, can you also expand on the hesitation towards while they're being in vet school, but also fulfilling military obligations? Would you characterize it as being manageable, or or can you expand on that too for those that are hesitant of balancing both academics and also the military obligations of what I would consider you being in the reserves at that time too, under contract?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you bring up a great point. You do actually, your first year, if you get the scholarship, you sign in as a second lieutenant, or you commission as a second lieutenant of the Individual Readiness Reserve, the IRR, which is a very special type of the reserves where you are not required to go to drill. You do not wear the uniform. Your job while you're in school is to be in school and is to pass the NAVLE, get your state license, graduate on time. Those are the big requirements. That's why we're paying for your schooling. What you do have to do during school, have being a strong word, it's strongly recommended. There is a class that you take during one of the summers of your vet school that kind of prepares you for being on active duty. So they pay for you to fly out to Oklahoma, you stay in barracks for a few weeks, they teach you how to be in the Army, and then how it is currently, they're still ironing out the kinks. But they bus you down to Texas for another 3 weeks where you learn how to do Army medicine. So, for both of those classes, you're with everyone in Army medicine. So doctors, nurses, dentists, all of them, we're all together. And then that's kind of the only requirement. And again, those are waiverable if you have a school that doesn't allow for those to be taken while you're in school. And so I would say overall, there really was no burden on me while being in school. Having said that, you definitely have a steep learning curve coming out of vet school because you are usually adapting not only to being a new vet, but also those two new missions that I talked to you about, the food side and the public health side, that we don't always get a lot of education on in vet school. And additionally, most of our new vets are put in charge of a clinic as their very first assignment. And so that can be a challenge as well because you're not only learning the medicine side and how to do your job, you're also learning how to manage a clinic and how to do the hirings, firings, counselings, all of that of being a practice manager. And so if you think you can do that, the military, I think, has been a really good option.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And then moving on to our next question. So, what information or advice do you wish you had known when you were a pre vet student?
I think the advice I would offer is consider the skills outside of the basic science classes that we all kind of think of when we think of vet school. They're going to reteach you that stuff in vet school anyway. And so taking the chance to expose yourself to other stuff like communication classes, conflict resolution classes, the other stuff that your unique undergraduate school offers. I think that looking back, I wish I had taken more of those classes to prepare me for the stuff outside of the actual science.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And then moving on, from your perspective, what is the biggest problem in animal healthcare that we face today?
Oof. Um, well, I do think the biggest problem we face today is this what seems to be a declining level of trust that people have, not only in their veterinarians, but in science and in medicine in general. I think we have to work a lot harder to show them that, or to tell them that this is why we need to do this for this reason. Where I think previous generations were a lot more willing to accept doctors as these subject matter experts who should not be questioned. I think these younger generations are treating medical professionals more like partners in the decision making process. So I think it's not necessarily a problem. I would say the lack of trust is a problem. We need to find a way to build those relationships with our clients. Um, but I would say, in general, the fact that people are willing to trust Facebook posts almost as much as they trust my opinion can be a little bit of a struggle sometimes. So yeah, I would say that's probably the one that I encounter most often.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing. And where do you see yourself in veterinary medicine in 10 years from now as well?
So where do I see myself or where do I see just vet med in general?
I would say the question would be more so geared veterinary medicine in 10 years, just in general, the field in
Okay.
itself.
What a tough question. You know, I have been following the movement of the VPA, the veterinary physician's assistant, pretty closely, and I do see it gaining traction in a lot of other states as this kind of mid-level practitioner, very similar to how human medicine does it. I think that that will present a lot of new challenges for us in the way that we train veterinarians. I am not sure whether our role as preventive medicine specialists will change, like whether or not we'll still be the ones to give vaccines, whether or not we'll still be the ones to see them for their annual appointments, or if we will move more toward kind of a specialists only kind of deal. I don't think anyone can predict the future that much. What I can say is the VPA, the AI movement that's been happening. One of the commanding generals here, he's very fond of saying that people will not be replaced by AI, but people who do not use AI will be replaced. And so I do see the practice of medicine being heavily impacted by AI, and especially if we can get it to the point where it's producing reliable medical information, I think it can be a valuable tool to help us save time, but to also put more tools in our toolbox. So uh, that's kind of what I see as the emerging trends right now is the AI and the VPA, and only time will tell where they go or how they move forward.
Oh, awesome. Very insightful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course.
And moving forward, what types of outreach and volunteer work do you do, if any?
Yeah. So I volunteer, or I used to before I moved here, at an SPCA once or twice a month where I would do spays and neuters, mass removals, amputations, whatever they needed to get done. I also volunteer through the military. There's a lot of different opportunities to work with like pre-vet students, or like specifically with our recruiters, or like our JROTC and ROTC populations. They're always looking for people who can help run those events. And so I help out a lot with those if I can. Um, and I would think those are kind of the two right now, um, that I usually do. But I would say probably, I don't know, 5 to 10 hours a month I volunteer or try to.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Another great question we have is, how do you spend your free time? Any particular hobbies that we didn't already address already?
Ooh. Um, so I think we already talked about, I do, the whole military thing, you got to stay fit. And so I really picked up long distance running. So I run half marathons. So I'm usually training on the weekends for those. I also do trail running, which is a lot more fun because you do a lot more navigating obstacles as you run. Um, Most of my other hobbies are pretty sedentary. I do a lot of like scrapbooking, bullet journaling, crafting, reading. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I'm always doing something. So, always doing something crafty. So I would say those are kind of my hobbies. And I collect fountain pens, which is weird, right? But I like
That's
them. So
awesome.
yeah.
Very unique. I love it though.
Yeah.
And I think for our final question as well, just due to our time constraint, but would be, what qualities have led you to be successful in your current role?
What qualities have led me to be successful in my current role? Um, I think a lot of it has been my willingness to admit when I don't know something. I think that's something that they kind of scare you away from in vet school. They always, want the vet to have the answer, and they always want you to be the final say, right? It's your license, it's your
Yes.
license on the line. And so what has enabled me to be successful in the military veterinary realm, the military medicine realm, is taking that step back, taking that slice of humble pie, and realizing that I have people to my left and to my right that have also been doing this a very long time. And they may not have the exact same skill set I have, but they've been through a lot of the same situations. And a lot of the problems I've had have been not medicine related, but human related. So human to like me client conflict, staff conflicts, um, those are the things that I think what has really led me to success is just relying heavily on my team to kind of, what do they say, the rising tide lifts all boats. And so that, and I think just having the drive to be a lifelong learner and realizing, I forget who said it, but being a lifelong learner means being a lifelong novice. And so you have to have that humility to also realize that you're not going to be good at everything the first time you try. And that doesn't mean that you don't try to improve. So I would say relying on your team and just being a lifelong learner, those two have really taken me this far.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I know that concludes our final question. I just want to say again, thank you so much, Captain Haley Davis, for taking the time out of your schedule to speak with us and just offer your insights and experiences that will be so beneficial to all those that will be watching this video too. And if I can add, if there's any final remarks that you have that would be sort of more so for the audience of pre-vets, or any general advice that you have for final remarks to those that may be seeking a similar path that you're currently in right now, if you have any final remarks for that.
Ooh, get after it. If you want it, no one's going to advocate more for it than you. And so don't wait for something to be handed to you. Seek it out.
Awesome. Well,
That's all
thank
I
you so
got.
much. And on behalf of the Health Profession Student Association, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you.